cspan.org. Washington Journal continues.
We want to welcome Congressman Aaron Schock, freshman Republican from Illinois. That includes the Springfield and Peoria and Decatur, Illinois area, the 18th District. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Steve, for having me on.
You're going to be testifying before a House Senate committee today looking at these vacancies, including the vacancy in Illinois. What's in your bill?
Well, my bill works within the confines of our Constitution. One would argue our most sacred document that we have as a country, and acts very swiftly to find a solution to this problem. There are two bills being debated, one that requires a constitutional amendment, my bill which does not. Simply put, it would require a special election within 90 days of a Senate vacancy in any state. Currently, there are some states that allow for special elections. This would simply give that same right to every voter in every state, regardless of where they live in the country. It would also allow for the state to pay for half of the special election and the federal government to pay for the other half. So it addresses kind of all of the concerns with those who have them with regards to special elections, but ensures that at the end of the day, the will of the voters prevails.
As you well know, the New York Times writes about it this morning. Anytime you're looking at even making any changes to the Constitution, in this case the 17th Amendment, it becomes a very slippery slope. How does your bill differ from what Senator Russ Feingold has been proposing?
Well, it's a very slippery slope, and it's also very expensive and a very timely, time-intensive process. The last constitutional amendment was actually proposed by James Madison. It took over 200 years to ratify. It was the one dealing with congressmen voting on pay raises that occur within their same terms. It was finally ratified in the 90s. Some of the amendments took as little as 2.5 to 3 years. But nonetheless, we're talking about years away from actually having some resolution. Mine simply could be passed into law and enacted immediately, and not only would affect the vacancies in the state of Illinois, but just in the past several months since that vacancy in Illinois, we've seen vacancies in Delaware, in New York, in New Hampshire, and invariably there are going to be more in the next couple of years that would not be affected if we went the Constitution, amending the Constitution route. This will simply allow people to make an appointment, the governor to make an appointment within 90 days of a vacancy in the case that there's some pressing national issue that there needs to be a senator acting on behalf of the state. But then that appointed senator would have to stand before the voters for election within 90 days, and ultimately would give the voters the opportunity to weigh in. An interesting fact, I think, is that even with the governor's appointments, when they have to stand before election, throughout history's time, with over 100 years that governors have been making appointments, just a third of those appointed U.S. senators actually win re-election, which I think underscores the fact that the governors are not in touch with the reality of what the voters would want, and that those appointed representatives are not, in fact, the people that the voters would ultimately choose to represent them in Washington if they had the opportunity to choose.
But based on that, if you are a governor of a state and you're going to fill an appointment, and then if your bill were to be signed into law, within 90 days there'd be an election, would that then lead the governor to select somebody who has either deep pockets or a lot of money in the Political Action Committee in order to withstand what would be a 90-day campaign that would be intensive in terms of advertising in a state like Illinois, New York, California, or elsewhere?
Sure, and I would venture to guess that that's in the minds of many governors to this day when they make an appointment. If they're trying to keep that seat for their party, they're often choosing the person that they think would be the best candidate, has maybe deep pockets, or perhaps can do something for them in the case of Illinois. Whatever those reasons are that are not pure, it's clear that it's not in the best interest of the voters, and ultimately the people who need to speak, the people who are without a doubt qualified, supremely qualified to choose the electorate of the state is the electorate. To choose the elected representative is the electorate.
And how much of this is based on what you're seeing in Illinois, and how much of it is based on your own belief of changing the system?
Well, unfortunately, Illinois has a sad history when it comes to this type of situation. In fact, it was 100 years ago that led to the 17th Amendment's adoption was the result, prior to that, legislatures used to make the appointment of a U.S. senator. And it was actually in Illinois where legislators were found being bribed by a potential U.S. Senate nominee or a U.S. Senate candidate who wanted the appointment. And so the 17th Amendment was offered and adopted as a result to take that power away from the legislatures and give it to one man or woman, the governor, as a way to somehow clean up the system. And And yet we see 100 years later now, unfortunately in my state, that same thing occurring with one man or one woman making that decision for the entire state and corruption seeping in. So I think that the surest way to ensure that there's no corruption, there's no ulterior motives, and that the public will is done is to put it out to the voters and let them elect their representative.
Aaron Schock represents Illinois' 18th district, a seat previously held by Ray LaHood, now the Transportation Secretary. Our phone lines are open. You can also email us, Havana, Illinois. Good morning.
Good morning. I want to commend Aaron on his FAST proposal, and I think it's probably one of the most important things he can do is straighten out some of the corruption we do have in Illinois. And it's not just Illinois, it's throughout the country, but I think better still, someone should look at overall campaign reform and try to take money out of politics. I just wonder what Aaron thinks about that.
Well, you know, without a doubt, fundraising, I would say, is the worst part of my job. You know, you're constantly, when you're in a 2-year cycle running every 2 years, it's a constant process of fundraising. And it currently is a reality of the system. Obviously, when our country was founded, there wasn't television, there wasn't the expensive mediums that are required now to compete and to run. You know, in addition to the personal contributions that oftentimes people focus on, where I really think we are doing ourselves harm is when these large PACs and these large special interest groups are able to weigh in. You know, I'm certainly open to ideas to reform. I'm not sure that the McCain-Feingold legislation has really solved the problem. In many cases, it's only exacerbated the problem because there's no limit on what individuals can put into the system, and so it puts somebody like myself, who's not independently wealthy, at a competitive disadvantage when there's people who get in the race that can spend, you know, $1 million, $5 million, $10 million of their own money, and yet, you know, the average citizen who wishes to run for office has to compete with them with their friends or neighbors' $10,000, $100,000 donations.
Honolulu, Hawaii, you're next. Good morning, caller. We'll try one more time for Honolulu if you're with us. We'll go on to Bel Air, Maryland, independent line. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, how are you?
Good morning.
Hello, good morning. How are you? I support what the congressman was saying about the reform. They need to reform the whole system. Only the rich people can be dominated by the governor, but we the people need to talk. Earlier election to appoint will be much more better. Also, I have to say something about what you said before about healthcare reform. There are a lot of people who come out of the country to just have a baby in U.S. And they will let America with the bill and go. Most of these people are rich where they come from. The problem about that is when their kids turn between 16 and 20 years old, they come back to U.S. and claim all the money they can claim and let the taxpayer with the bills.
I'll stop you on that point. Thank you for the call. The second point on health care, which we were talking about earlier, but let me pick up at the caller's first point and ask you specifically with regard to states like New York, or Delaware, or Colorado, where there were also vacancies, or New Hampshire, where there might have been a vacancy, and Ted Gregg continued with his nomination as Commerce Secretary. Did any of those governors do it right?
Well, I think each one of them presented different situations. You had the governor of Illinois, our governor, who is currently there now, replacing Blagojevich, who said he wishes there would be a special election. You had the governor of New York, Governor Patterson, who said he wishes he didn't have to make the appointment and wishes it were a special election. You had the situation in Delaware, of course, where there's some controversy there, whether there was a placeholder put in place for Mr. Biden's son. You have the New Hampshire situation, which was a potential situation which didn't occur, but that was kind of a backroom deal where there was going to be a placeholder, if you will. So again, not real pure, not real open, not real clean processes, and I guess underscores the need for reform.
Next call is from Hoover, Alabama, for Congressman Aaron Schock, Republican of Illinois. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, ma'am. I appreciate your effort at reform, but I would suggest to you that you're going the wrong way. I would rather see the 17th Amendment repealed and send these elections, whether they're special elections or regular elections for senators, back to the state legislators. In my view, the Founding Fathers gave the states representation in the legislature through the senators. In other words, equal representation for each state. As it is now, states have no representative in the federal government.
Which is something we talked about earlier. Did you want to follow up on that?
Well, I certainly appreciate that view. I would disagree and point back to the purpose of the 17th Amendment, which was to try and reform the original system, which led to corruption, which led to candidates who wished for the appointment going to these individuals. It may be 100, it may be 120, depending on the size of the state and the size of the legislature, and trying to trade favors, in some cases engage in bribery to get that appointment. And again, it's not a clean system, it's not an open system, and it's not a fair system. And the only way to ensure the will of the voters is to give them the opportunity to weigh in.
You're testifying today before the Joint House-Senate Judiciary Committee. What happens then beyond today's hearing?
Well, I think this is really a discussion point or a point of discussion for the House and the Senate, both of which have interest in taking action on this. There's two bills, both mine as well as Senator Feingold's bill that deal with this, and so I think that there's going to be some healthy discussion, and regardless of which route is taken, I think there's going to be some refinement of either of the bills and hopefully some action. So I'm looking to gain support from my colleagues in the House as well as my colleagues in the Senate to move forward on my bill, and I'm sure that Senator Feingold wishes to do the same.
Senator Bennett of Colorado, who was appointed by Governor Ritter, saying that he does not like the Feingold proposal because he says it leaves a state without representation for a number of months in order to have this special election.
And clearly my bill does not.
Next call is from Durham, North Carolina. Good morning.
Good morning. The question I wanted to ask, and it may have been answered already, the question I wanted to ask is, why was the appointment power given to governors originally, and what was the rationale? If you could go into a little bit of depth about that, please.
And let me just add to that, it's different for the House vacancy versus the Senate vacancy, so those issues collectively.
Yeah, well, for the House, as you know, a special election is required. Let me also establish the reason we went with a 90-day time period is we looked around the country at what the length of time that states took for special elections with congressional candidates. And the longest period of time that governors traditionally would take is 90 days. So we gave the maximum amount of time for a governor in a state to organize a special election. That's where the 90 days came from. To the caller's question, we established the gubernatorial appointments, if you will, as a result of a similar situation, actually, that occurred in my home state of Illinois over 100 years ago, where a potential Senate candidate who was looking for an appointment was attempting to bribe the state legislature for the appointment. And up until that point, the state legislatures of each state, when there was a Senate vacancy, would be in charge of replacing that person, and the state legislature would vote on it, just like they voted on a bill. There would be nominations, and a majority vote would decide who was the Senate replacement for that state. And the 17th Amendment was adopted to try and clean up that system, take the power away from the state legislatures, and give it to the governor in hopes for reform.
Have you had any conversations with your colleague, Senator Burris?
Not about this issue.
Do you think he will stay in office over the next 2 years? There have been some, including Senator Durbin, who have suggested that he should resign.
Well, I think the majority of our delegation, both Republicans and Democrats in the Congress from Illinois, have called on his resignation, I being one of them. I think that his ability to serve on our behalf and to be effective as a senator has been sorely affected. And our own governor, actually, Pat Quinn, a Democrat governor and a friend of Senator Burris's, has said that he thinks the legislature should adopt a bill to call for a special election. And I'm hopeful that the state legislature in Illinois will still do that while this bill is pending in the United States Congress.
Pasadena, California, for Congressman Schock. Good morning.
Good morning. I have a couple of questions for the congressman. The first one, isn't it somewhat hypocritical to increase government spending on special elections, given the time of physical crisis we're having right now in government? And number two is, isn't it a little bit like rearranging deck chairs while the ship is sinking by worrying about an issue that's not tangential to what's going on in the government today?
Well, I think you raised two very good points. First of all, with regards to cost, I think it's very dangerous to put any value on good government. In fact, the reason that we're in this situation in my state of Illinois, quite frankly, is because we had a governor who tried to, in his term, monetize the value of a Senate seat. And I don't think any value can be placed on having the will of the people done and having a clean, fair election. Nobody argues the point when there are special elections in a U.S. House seat and whether or not it's worth the cost to have the public weigh in and choose their representative. I don't think that the cost of the election should, in fact, be the determinant on whether or not we should have a special election for a U.S. Senate seat. I would also point out that by giving them a 90-day window, depending on when the vacancy occurs, the governors, in many cases, they do this for a congressional vacancy, will time it with a municipal election or an otherwise statewide election or referendum so that there's not duplicative cost to run a special election. To your second point, is this tangential or somehow a distraction from the big issues here out in Washington? I think it plays right into it. The president ran on change. The president ran on reform. The president ran on cleaning up government, and that was what the public voted for. And I think this bill and reforming the way the U.S. Senate vacancies are replaced is part and parcel to that, cleaning up government, offering reform, and giving power back to the people to weigh in on who's making decisions before them. They don't like the backroom deals that are being cut. They don't like the quid pro quo and the shenanigans that are being played out right now in Washington or back in our states when these vacancies occur, and I think the people want change.
Have you had any conversations with anyone within the White House on how they feel about this?
I have not.
Next call is from Rancho Mirage, California. Good morning.
Good morning. I just kind of had a thought that what would happen, I have two questions. First of all, what would happen if you just left it vacant? It would change the makeup of the majority or whatever. And so the next election, would it be that detrimental? I think that might be to an advantage to unbalance the balanced majority, you know, and so the next election, it wouldn't be that long. I mean, they're not too far apart. So
let's take that point, and then we'll follow up on your second point. Why not? Yeah. It would be, in this case, a number of key Senate positions that would be open for 2 years.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have to look at what the role of a U.S. Senator is. A U.S. Senator does two main functions. First of all, they act on behalf of the state here in terms of drafting legislation, voting on legislation, advocating on behalf of important projects for their state. And number two, they run a state office that provides constituent work to their states. If you have a problem with the federal government or a federal agency, you call your elected representative, your U.S. Senator. And so to create a vacancy where that office would basically be shuttered for months or potentially years at a time would, I think, do a disservice to the voters and the taxpayers of that state who have who have the right to have an elected representative. I'm mindful of the old adage, you know, taxation without representation, and they deserve to have someone there to provide constituent service for them and their family and friends when they need help with the federal government, and also someone who is acting on their behalf in the U.S. Senate if a vacancy occurs.
And your second point, caller?
My second point is I'm on permanent disability, and I have a very small 401k plan, and it's like started at $9,000. Goodness knows where it's down to now, but just a suggestion so that people could be helped where I could even get my medications that I need, but to get that money out and not have to have half of it taxed, I don't see how that could help some of the extra money we're spending to bail people out. Let us bail ourselves out and not be penalized for it. It would pay for a lot of months of medication for me.
I couldn't agree with you more, ma'am. In fact, that's an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I actually talked about it last fall as a candidate for Congress, giving you the same opportunity, giving ordinary citizens the same opportunity for pre-tax dollars from their 401k or IRA to be spent on health care dollars, similar to what a small business or corporation gets in terms of money they spend on behalf of their employees' health care. So I agree with you and would support such a measure.
It is day 51 for the President, for you and your colleagues in the 111th Congress. It's day what?
60, roughly.
As a freshman representative, what's the experience been like?
You know what? It's been a complete honor to be here. There's not a day that I don't walk up the steps of the Capitol and get a tingle down my spine and feel very, very fortunate to the people of my state for sending me here to represent them. It's a lot of work. It's trying times. Make no mistake that, I'm very concerned as an American citizen about the direction of our country and the economic situation that we're in. Every weekend I go back to my district. I hear from folks like the last caller whose 401k and IRAs have been cut in half and sometimes worse, and they're very concerned. People are losing their jobs. The economy is in a bit of a stumble right now, and so what we do here, I think, is very important in terms of getting economic recovery, creating an environment where people can get back on their feet, small businesses can start going again and employing people and growing, and also to restore faith and confidence in the markets and in investors. So, there's important work for us ahead, but it's an extremely awesome responsibility. And I think the most important work we do, though, is back home with constituents, the people who call my office, who need help. Being able to solve those problems, even in the first couple of months, has been extremely rewarding.
At the age of 27, you have to be 30 to be in the U.S. Senate. Any interest in possibly running for that, either in a special election or down the road?
I am very happy with my responsibilities as a U.S. Congressman. And like I said, I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to serve. I was sworn in January. I have to file petitions in September to run again already, less than 9 months away. And I intend to run for re-election, hopefully, if the voters will give me that chance again, and continue to serve them.
Fort Worth, Texas. For Congressman Aaron Schock of Illinois, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, sir.
The idea of an amendment to the Constitution over this issue kind of strikes me as odd. Being that you're a Republican, and Republicans being very strong on states' rights, or they used to be, I don't think they were in the last 8 years. You couldn't have told me they were strong on it based on what happened. But as a Democrat here in Texas, I am also somebody that's strong for states' rights. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's really any business of our Congress or our senators to get involved in something like this, where you're going to be mandating what the process is for a state. Let me give you an example of why I say that. You take a little state like Delaware or Rhode Island, who's got, let's say they've got somebody like Senator Biden, who has been there since he was almost your age as a senator. And they were pleased with the work that he had done for them. And now he hands in his position on the Senate, and he goes in to be the vice president. Now, he has a son who's a hero who went to Iraq and who had probably every intention to try to take that Senate seat. But you know what? That's okay, because that appears to be what the majority of the people want in Delaware.
I'll stop you on that point. We'll get a response.
Well, sir, with all due respect, if that's the will of the majority of the people of Delaware, my bill would give them the opportunity to say just that. But I do not believe that this position, either a U.S. House member or a U.S. Senate position or the presidency, is in somehow some type of a gift that you can give from one generation to the next. These are positions that are given to us who serve by the electorate. At least that's what I believe it should be. And if and when the people decide that they do not wish to have us representing them, they have the ability every election to replace us. And so I don't care whether it's the state of Illinois, whether it's the state of Delaware, or the state of Texas. I think all voters ought to be given that responsibility. And with respect to your point about the federal government deciding the process, I don't think the governors ought to decide, nor the federal government ought to decide. My bill simply gives that responsibility and that voice back to the people. And so, again, I think it's the cleanest, fairest way to replace a U.S. senator.
Our guest is the former president of the Peoria, Illinois School Board, former state representative from Illinois, now in his first term from Illinois' 18th district, and Oklahoma City is next. Congressman Aaron Schock, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, sir.
First, let me express it's really refreshing to see someone like yourself who has a constitutional perspective, and it's nice to have that in Congress, fresh blood. I think it's something we've needed. I admire your approach to the voting situation relative to replacement of senators for two reasons. One, special interest from my perspective, and the money that goes in there, we've just spent billions of dollars, so, go figure.
in my opinion, we still have one thing left in this country that's untouched, that's constitutional, and that's the vote. And it's refreshing to hear you say you support that. And so I still think the people have a right to choose who they want into a particular office. So,
thank you, sir.
More of a comment, not a question? Any response?
No, I agree, and I think hopefully that will be the response of the overwhelming majority of Americans when they find out about this opportunity in this bill. And I'm hopeful that the listening audience who agrees and who wishes for this opportunity, if and when a vacancy occurs, will contact their members of Congress. Ultimately, we are representatives of the people. We are to vote on behalf of the people. And so I would encourage your listening audience who supports such a measure, or who doesn't support a measure, actually, regardless, that they weigh into their members of Congress. Let them know that they wish that they would, co-sponsor or support this bill that I'm pushing forward, if they are, in fact, supporters, so that we can get some action on this bill this Congress.
Our last call is from Illinois, Canton, Illinois, on the Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Congressman Schock. This is Bill from Canton, and I have a comment to make. I've dealt with you several times, and I want the viewers out there to realize that you're the real deal. And the young people should understand that if you want to clean up Illinois, this is the type of congressman that we need. I dealt with he hires excellent staff, as in Nate Hearn, who helps veterans. And this congressman, he is the real deal. There is no hidden flaws in this man. He represents the people of Illinois.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, caller.
I don't know Bill's last name, but certainly it's always good to hear a favorable response. And knowing in this business, you usually hear people call in when they're ready to complain, not when they're singing the praise. So I am very blessed to have good staff. You are correct.
You've been getting a lot of media attention. Fox News Power Player of the Week this past Sunday. Jamie Gangel, piece on you last week on the Today Show. Did you expect all of this?
I don't think you can expect all of this. It's all new. It's all, a new process, a new environment out here. Like I said, I'm very fortunate to be here. And what I'm trying to do this next year is to build relationships with people, because I think bipartisan relationships, working with my Republican colleagues and my Democrat colleagues, is ultimately the way you get things done. And I'm the first to say I've got a lot to learn, but I do bring a different perspective. I bring a younger perspective. I bring a new perspective to a lot of the issues that we're facing out here in Washington. And I think that's what makes government great, is diversity. Diversity in thought, diversity in perspective, and diverse representation from around the country. So I just consider it an honor to be here and serve.
And your message to the House Senate Judiciary Committees today is what?
This is a cleaner bill, a less costly bill, a more timely bill, and will do what we all agree needs to be done much quicker and cleaner.
Congressman Aaron Schock, Republican of Illinois. Come back again. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Steve, for having me.
Appreciate it. What's next in Afghanistan? Milt Bearden is an expert, former CIA officer.